The Bolivian Workers' Confederation has begun a series of protests on a national scale to voice labour demands and condemn measures promoted by the de facto government of Janine Áñez. Medical workers' unions marched on Bastille Day in Paris to denounce staff shortages and a lack of personal protective equipment. The funeral service of Ivorian Prime Minister Amadou Gon Coulibaly took place in Abidjan this Tuesday. From the headquarters of Telesur English in Havana, Cuba, this is From the South, and I'm Katrina Goss. The Bolivian Workers' Confederation has begun a series of protests on a national scale to voice labour demands and condemn measures promoted by the de facto government of Janine Áñez. As part of the mobilizations, the Union Federation organised marches in the city of La Paz to demand the resignation of the Ministers of Labour and Education. Activists are also calling on the de facto regime to adopt a health policy to contain the COVID-19 pandemic, with over 49,000 cases reported in the country and an official death toll of almost 2,000. The mobilisation was joined by teachers from rural areas who are questioning the authorities' intention to implement a virtual classroom system. This Tuesday, the UN Security Council met to consider the quarterly report on the implementation of the peace agreement in Colombia. The Special Representative and head of the UN Verification Mission in Colombia stressed that the killing of former combatants, human rights defenders and social leaders remains the most serious threat to peace in the country.
The insecurity faced by former FARC-EP combatants, communities, human rights defenders and social leaders such as Ms. Carabalí remains our greatest concern. And unfortunately, this insecurity has continued throughout the pandemic. Despite the commitment and measures implemented by the government and state authorities, the number of former combatants killed since the signing of the peace agreement has surpassed 200, reaching 210. Without a doubt, violence against those who lay down their arms in the context of the agreement and against those who defend human rights and the rights of communities devastated by the conflict continues to be the most serious threat to the consolidation of peace in Colombia.
Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro provided an update on COVID-19 cases this Tuesday. President Maduro reported 281 new locally transmitted cases and 22 imported cases were confirmed in the past 24 hours. He also announced there were 3 new COVID-19 deaths in the states of Zulia, Trujillo and Falcón. The president noted that Caracas and Miranda will go into radical quarantine in order to break the chain of infection and explained about the existence of a new email address which can be used to notify the authorities about those people illegally entering the country without undergoing the health protocols at borders. In Brazil, several political parties are demanding the impeachment of President Jair Bolsonaro as part of the so-called Windows for Democracy protest movement. The 7-party group believes Bolsonaro should be removed from office for promoting hate speech and dismantling essential public policies in the midst of the health crisis sparked by the coronavirus pandemic. Meanwhile, several workers' and students' organisations will submit a request to the lower house for the impeachment of the Brazilian president after he was accused of violating human rights during his term in office. The Windows for Democracy protest movement sees people organising from their homes and virtually to denounce the Brazilian government's mishandling of the COVID-19 crisis. The Pan American Health Organization vowed on Tuesday to grant subsidized access of COVID-19 vaccines to the most vulnerable countries in Latin America and the Caribbean.
It's also coordinated with Gavi and other partners to guarantee that the most vulnerable countries in our region receive the vaccine against COVID-19 in a subsidized manner and at an affordable price. The most vulnerable populations have been hit the hardest. In Brazil, for instance, indigenous communities along the Amazon basin are seeing incidence rates more than 5 times the national average. It is critical that we work today to ensure equal access to these life-saving tools when they become available, and that we develop a strategy for delivering them quickly and safely.
This Tuesday, Cuba reported 4 new confirmed coronavirus patients, bringing the total to 2,432, while no new COVID-19 deaths were reported. National Director of Epidemiology at the Cuban Ministry of Public Health, Dr. Francisco Duran, explained that there are now 68 active cases in the country, 67 of which are clinically stable, while 1 patient is seriously ill. The new cases are from Havana and were contacts of previously confirmed cases. Havana continues in the first stage of recovery as it maintains the highest COVID-19 prevalence at 3.89% per 100,000 inhabitants. 94% of confirmed patients have recovered from the virus.
According to the analysis of these samples, 4 new patients were diagnosed with SARS-CoV-2 and COVID-19. In total, in our country, we have analyzed 211,427 samples and 2,432 have tested positive.
And our correspondent in Havana, Laura Palmera, brings us a roundup of news from the Caribbean region.
Thanks for the contact. These are the most recent stories and news from Caribbean countries. And in Guyana, they are seeking for a peaceful solution for March 2nd general election results.
4 months after the elections, the Guyanese people are living in a scenario of uncertainty and political crisis, encouraged by the dispute over whether the full elections should be scrapped, following accusations of fraud that are delaying the process. The Caribbean Court of Justice in its recent decision noted that the election of a president and members of the National Assembly can only be done in accordance with the votes counted and the information provided by officials under the Representation of the People Act. Recently, the Director General of the Elections, Keith Lowenfield, presented the Elections Commissions with a report of the votes that assured the victory for the Coalition of National Unity and the Alliance for Change over the opposition People's Progressive Party. Nobel Peace Prize winner Rigoberta Menchú said that 60 years of criminal blockade against Cuba is a real offense to humanity and condemned the current campaign to discredit the island's medical cooperation. In her writing on social media, she qualified as unprecedented, truly courageous and unacceptable to compare Cuban humanitarian medical work with the abominable practices of human history, such as crimes against humanity, human trafficking, and contemporary slavery. According to Menchú, the intensification of the attack on Cuba's scientific and medical cooperation is a part of a readjustment of the forms and methods assumed by the economic blockade imposed by the United States since 1960, which is now in its 6th decade.
American Airlines has informed the reopening of flights to St. Lucia.
American Airlines relaunched its flights from Miami to St. Lucia last July 9, and in this very moment, the world's largest airline is operating a once-daily service on Boeing 737-800 aircraft. St. Lucia first reopened its doors to tourists on June 9. The destination recently updated its COVID-19 travel protocols with a requirement that travelers provide proof of negative COVID-19 tests within 7 days of their arrival in St. Lucia. The flight from Miami International Airport to St. Lucia's Ewanora International Airport takes about 3 hours and 35 minutes.
And these are the most recent stories and news from Caribbean countries. Let's go back with you in the studio.
Thank you, Laura, and we're taking a very short break now, so don't go away. Welcome back to From the South. Health authorities in the United States have noted that the city of Miami in Florida state is the new epicenter of the COVID-19 pandemic in the country. The news was announced by infectious disease experts at Florida International University. Referring to the rapid spread of the virus in this region of the United States, specialists highlighted that the current situation is similar to that which was seen in the Chinese city of Wuhan 6 months ago. Over the last 48 hours, 28,000 new cases have been confirmed in Florida state, although authorities have not announced any new measures to contain the spread of the virus. In this context, US President Donald Trump continues to insist on the reopening of schools across the country to allow parents to go back to work. Medical workers' unions marched on Bastille Day in Paris to denounce staff shortages and a lack of personal protective equipment that have plagued public hospitals as the coronavirus spread across France. In the midst of widespread mobilisations on the date, protesters also chanted slogans against police brutality, racism and against the policies of President Emmanuel Macron, seen as favouring the wealthy. They also denounced the move by the new French Prime Minister to promote a colleague accused of rape as his interior minister. Some protesters wore yellow vests representing the ongoing movement for economic justice. Police were seen making arrests and tear gas was fired to disperse protesters. The United Kingdom has bowed to US pressure and approved the phased removal of Chinese telecoms giant Huawei from its 5G network despite warnings of retaliation from Beijing. Secretary of State for Digital, Culture, Media and Sport Oliver Dowden announced the move in Parliament after Prime Minister Boris Johnson chaired meetings with his cabinet and the National Security Council. The policy reversal hands a major victory to US President Donald Trump's administration in its geopolitical and trade war with China. But it also threatens to further damage the UK's relations with China and will carry a big cost for UK mobile providers that have relied on Huawei equipment for nearly 20 years. The new guidelines also require telecoms firms to remove all existing Huawei gear by the end of 2026.
It will be illegal for them to do so. So to be clear,
Italian authorities have announced the extension of COVID-19 restrictions until June 31st as a move to curb the recent surge in cases.
We must not retreat 1 inch on prevention measures if we want to learn to live with the virus until a vaccine is found and to reignite all the engines of our economy, and so that we can tackle the serious social problems we see expanding our country. In line with all this, the government intends to adopt, as a result of this parliamentary session, a new decree to extend the measures currently in force until July 31. We maintain the decision to quarantine for 14 days all those arriving from outside Europe and coming from non-Schengen countries as a precautionary measure to prevent the spread of the contagion. We are paying particular attention to the landings on our coastals with strict health checks and mandatory quarantine for all those who arrive. No underestimation can be allowed.
The Greek Prime Minister called on the European Union this Tuesday to take action against Turkey following the decision to convert the emblematic Hagia Sophia Museum into a mosque.
This is a decision that is painful to us as Greek Orthodox Christians and hers as citizens of the world. This is not a Greek-Turkish issue or even a Europe-Turkish issue. It is a global issue for all of mankind. Taking this backward step, Turkey has chosen to cut ties with the Western world and its values. After this insult, the question arises whether Hagia Sophia can retain its privileged status as World Heritage Site of UNESCO and whether it is fair for UNESCO to extend this enormous honor to the country that is supposed to host it.
Serbian health authorities reported 344 new COVID-19 cases on Tuesday, while calling on the population not to join protests over the reimposition of measures to curb the spread of the virus.
Once again, I beg all citizens of Serbia not to do these things, not to gather in large groups, especially indoors, to keep the distance and wear masks indoors. I beg you. I will repeat that 1,000 times, so we can come out of this situation and save as many lives as possible.
China registered better than expected foreign trade performance in the first half of the year, with exports and imports both rising in June as the country's economic recovery gathers momentum.
Foreign trade of goods went down 3.2% year-on-year in the first half of this year, narrowing by 3.3 percentage points compared with the decrease for the first quarter. Foreign trade in the first half of the year was better than expected, with both imports and exports registering positive growth in June. By issuing a set of policy portfolios, the Chinese government has helped the foreign trade enterprises to prevent and control the epidemic while resuming production and work. It supports enterprises to maintain the market share and others so as to ease the burden for them. All these efforts help to stabilize the base of foreign trade in China.
Now we have more stories coming up after this final short break, so stay with us. from the south. The funeral service of Ivorian Prime Minister Amadou Gon Coulibaly, who died just days after returning from France, where he underwent treatment for a heart condition, took place in Abidjan this Tuesday.
Amadou, slowly your entire silhouette now moves away from us, then the cruel and finished states that your departure leaves today in our souls will be transformed tomorrow for the team of which you were the leader and national leader, of which you were so proud. To us now, as part of the vision of Côte d'Ivoire 2030, that you have encouraged to live your vision to allow Ivorians to dream ever bigger, ever more beautiful, ever higher, ever further.
I take this sad opportunity to say, dear Ivorians, dear brothers and sisters, a few months away from an important deadline, the unanimity that we observe around Amadou Gon is not this unanimity a sign to remind our compatriots, our political leaders from all walks of life, that the peace in which we believe must be considered as a common good to be preserved. To the youth of this country, I want to say this. Remember that it was through hard work and competence that Amadou Gon Coulibaly climbed step by step to the top. Remember that he died on the job. For our country to continue its march towards the progress of prosperity in peace and stability.
Kenyan health authorities reported a record number of new COVID-19 cases in a single day this Tuesday, while calling not to stigmatize those who've been infected.
Today, 497 people have tested positive out of a sample of 4,922 samples tested within the last 24 hours. This brings our total caseload to 10,791. 480 are Kenyans, while 17 are foreigners. 318 are male and 179 are female. The youngest is a 2-year-old child, while the oldest is 89. And in terms of distribution, like we've started today, again, Nairobi continues to lead with 292 cases. We need to remember that coronavirus is a disease, and getting this disease is not a crime. And those who are infected with this disease are not criminals. And therefore, it is important we note that this virus can indeed be contracted by anyone. The high and mighty in society, and everyone else in society, we've repeated over and over again, anyone can get this disease. And so it's important that we take care of each other and we avoid stigmatizing those who have the disease or those who may be affected by the disease.
Kenyan President Uhuru Kenyatta acknowledged political progress in the South Sudan peace process on Tuesday, noting that milestone breakthroughs have been achieved between different parties.
I wish to note that in the last 5 months, we have indeed witnessed a positive political momentum in the South Sudan peace process. Though significant compromises have been made by the parties, we must admit that a number of important milestones and breakthroughs have indeed been achieved. The establishment of the executive of the new revitalized transitional government of national unity and the agreement on responsibility sharing at the state level, as well as the appointment of state governors, has set the foundation for the transition period.
The International Court of Justice has backed Qatar in a bitter row with 4 of its neighbours that imposed an air blockade against the country after accusing it of backing radical Islamists and Iran.
1. Unanimously rejects the appeal brought by the Kingdom of Bahrain, the Arab Republic of Egypt, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates on 4 July 2018 from the decision of the Council of the International Civil Aviation Organization dated 29 June 2018.
The waters of the Brahmaputra, one of Asia's largest rivers, have continued to wreak havoc in northeastern India's Assam state, displacing more than 2 million people. Authorities in the state confirmed 77 deaths due to floods and landslides since the beginning of the rains late last month, and said vast areas were still underwater, with 26 of the state's 33 districts badly affected. Thousands of people were seen taking shelter on Tuesday on a raised river embankment after being displaced from their submerged homes in central Assam's Morigaon district. The Brahmaputra River, which flows through Tibet, India and Bangladesh, burst its banks in Assam late last month, inundating large areas of the state. The World Health Organization reported that 20 people have died from Ebola in the Democratic Republic of the Congo since the outbreak of the disease on June 1st. The WHO detailed in its latest report that the nation currently has 49 cases, of which 46 have been confirmed in lab tests, while 3 are likely cases of infection, and 11 people have overcome the highly contagious disease. This is the 9th time that the DRC is facing an Ebola outbreak. The last time was during the second quarter of 2018, when 54 cases were registered and 33 people died, while 21 survived the disease. And we've come to the end of this news brief, but you can find these and many other stories on our website at telesoenglish.net. You can also join us on social media, Facebook, Twitter and Instagram. For Teleso English, I'm Katrina Goss, and thank you for watching.